across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Let's speak with Natasha Hausdorff, barrister, legal director at UK Lawyers for Israel. Natasha, nice to have you with us. I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but I mean, we know what's going on. We know that there is this sort of momentum among some Labour members to get Palestine recognised as an official state, as a country, etc., whatever phrase you want to give to it. What's your initial reaction to this?
Well, given that the recognition that was promised by Macron, by France, was welcomed immediately by Hamas as a positive step, certainly that ought to give Starmer and the Labour Party pause for thought. But the Leader of the Opposition, I think, has put it very diplomatically. The real problem with what is being toyed with this recognition of a state which simply does not exist, certainly doesn't exist under international law, is that it simply serves to encourage Hamas and other Palestinian terrorist groups and encourage intransigence. We've seen the impact on Hamas walking away from the negotiation table and the American proposed hostage release and ceasefire proposals. And we have seen the elongation, the prolongation of this conflict as a result of this very dangerous and unfounded rhetoric.
Yeah, I mean, it's rather extraordinary to me. I was watching the 7/7 documentary that Netflix has shown, a sort of 4-part series, and looking, obviously it taps into the sort of Al-Qaeda ideology and what managed to have these young guys just somehow enamored by what was happening over there and wanting to replicate it. And as I was watching, I thought, well, this is Hamas. This is what they do. You know, this is what they believe and they think. And here we have, you know, international statesmen like Macron and, you know, potentially Keir Starmer, but certainly the sort of David Lammys of this world, that they want to legitimize that sort of ideology. And I don't know, I don't think I'm exaggerating or misrepresenting it, but that's precisely what they would be doing, right?
It was certainly what has been achieved so far and what would be continued by these sorts of proposals for recognition, but it won't change the state of play on the ground in any way. One cannot will a state into being. International law is very clear on the criteria for statehood: permanent population, defined territory, government, and capacity to enter into international relations. That's a matter of customary international law. It's also recorded in the Montevideo Convention. That much is settled. The Palestinians have never had a territory. Certainly, they do not have a defined territory now. Government also presents a significant issue when one considers the Hamas violent takeover in 2007 of the Gaza Strip. So we're not talking about even a single government across the territory that has been designated for a Palestinian autonomy, not a state, and that's a really important clarification. It puts the lie to this term that's often deployed here, occupation, but also it highlights two very important points, very important repercussions that I've not heard anyone mentioning on this question of the United Kingdom supposedly recognising the so-called state of Palestine. The first is that this is ultimately an attack on Israeli sovereign territory. This is territory that has never changed its status since Israel's formation in 1948. It would such a recognition served to supposedly legitimize Jordan's occupation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem between 1948 and 1967, and Egypt's occupation of Gaza between 1948 and 1967, when Israel recovered that territory. But it would also fly completely in the face of the Oslo Accords, which the United Kingdom endorsed, as did many other international players, which provided very clearly that after certain territory was given to the Palestinian Authority to have an autonomy given by Israel, that any change to borders or any change to the status of the territory would only arise from a bilateral negotiated final status settlement. That piece of paper that the UK endorsed is simply being torn up as a result of these proposals for recognition. And it leaves us with a very difficult position where Israel's not going to be in a position to trust any agreement it enters with international backing and international guarantees if it can be so readily thrown out of the window. So the repercussions of what is being discussed go far, far further than it seems these politicians have taken the time to educate themselves about.
If you were to sort of shift your barrister brain into the minds of those that do advocate for Palestine to be recognised as a state, that the Macrons, and I mentioned David Lammy, I don't think he's ever come out with it, but you kind of know, those kind of voices, they would naturally say, no, of course we don't support Hamas. What do you think their thinking is, by their logic, they are trying to achieve by this?
Well, it seems to me that they have been very badly misled indeed, both by the international media coverage over the last 21 months, but also the rewriting of history. Many of these people seem to think that there was once a Palestine which was taken away from people, and that this land has been occupied by Israel. And that is simply incorrect, both on the historical and the legal analysis. Even the notion of Palestinian national identity is something of a more recent creation. It exists, and the Palestinians have self-determination, they have autonomy, they have self-governance. We've unfortunately seen the devastating consequences of that under Hamas in Gaza, and increasingly we see Hamas threatening a takeover of the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority as well. So I think their good intentions, no doubt, have been thoroughly misdirected by the misinformation, the false information and the false narratives that have been projected. I mean, I'm sitting here in front of you, the granddaughter of Palestinians. You know, that might strike people as somewhat odd, but before the creation of the State of Israel, there was no such thing as exclusively Arab Palestinian national identity. It applied to all the people living in that territory. And as Israel was the only state to emerge from that mandate, the consensus that there has been some sort of change in the borders, and I've heard many people, politicians now, also referring to this misnomer of 1967 borders. Let me be clear. There's no such thing. The lines that are being referred to are not borders, and they refer to the armistice lines of 1948, the lines at which the relevant armies basically agreed to stop during the first attempted war of annihilation against Israel in 1948. So there is so much to unpack here in terms of the misinformation of the history, but that's ultimately, I think, what is leading these well-intentioned people into this very dangerous path. The effects of what they are calling for cannot be denied. That is why Hamas has welcomed recognition by France. It is seeking, at this stage, simply to survive and to drag on this conflict in Gaza as long as possible. That is costing lives, Palestinian lives and Israeli lives, and the lives of the hostages that are still alive and being kept in terror tunnels by Hamas are very much in the balance. So they may be well-intentioned, but they are doing a great deal of damage, including to the Palestinian civilians that they purport to support.
What does your sort of legal gut tell you on this? I mean, Keir Starmer, I would imagine, you know, half an hour ago when he was, doing what you do for a living, but in a different strand of the law, he was a human rights barrister. He undoubtedly would have supported the idea of recognising Palestine as its own place, its own country, etc. He has to play a very different game as Prime Minister. Personally, I can't imagine him quite putting his name to this. I might be wrong. Where do you see this coming down on? What do you think, what will an announcement look like after this Cobra meeting with the Cabinet?
Well, Keir Starmer has most recently been consistent in saying that any recognition would have to be as part of a process. But the fact of the matter is that if a lawyer is looking at these issues, then there has to be a recognition of how international law properly applies here, what the status of this territory is. And we have to do away with these political terms of occupation included, which are not reflective of what the legal status of the territory is. I have to, be frank that the recognition of states and the creation of states in international law is sometimes a debated area. There are different schools of thought on this, but what generally international lawyers agree on are the required elements that I mentioned under the Montevideo Convention, which the Palestinians simply do not meet. You cannot will a state into existence, and it's important to state that Keir Starmer is wrong. Absolutely wrong on the international law when he talks about a supposed inalienable right of the Palestinians to a state. There is no such thing. If there was a right to statehood under international law, the Kurds would have a state. There'd be many hundreds more states. In fact, what international law prizes far higher is territorial integrity of existing states. That's how international law works. So both on the facts, the law, the politics, and in encouraging internationally prescribed terrorist organisations with these political antics and dangerous rhetorics, I'm afraid the Prime Minister would be wrong on every count.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what comes of this. Is it maybe there's a kicking into the long grass, which seems to be the usual political manoeuvre at these times, and sort of wearing both hats. Maybe it will be that. Natasha, great to have you on. Let's speak again. Thank you for being with us. Natasha Hausdorff, Legal Director at UK Lawyers for Israel, a very senior barrister in this area and very thorough on her history.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.